Well, that shouldn't have worked. Welcome to Tattoo Tabletop. My name is James, and today we are talking about Dragonfall GT. The GT I was at this past weekend with some buddies from Minnesota. Had a great time, had a blast. It was a charity. It was a GT4 charity, and that's super awesome. Raised a lot of money. There was some really cool raffles. I got 20 Death Rattle skeletons out of the raffle. That's awesome. That's always good to add to my Soulblight Gravelord, so I'm really excited for that. The trickiest part about it all is it wasn't on BCP. It was just run pen and paper. But again, still had a blast, so we're just going to quick talk about those games. So if you review my video from last week, the one that should pop up right here, or like here, I can't remember which one, so I'm just going to point to both and just look up there and you'll see it there. So basically, with that janky list that I brought, it had some legs, short legs, Dwarf put them cheap, but it still had some play, and so I was kind of curious to see how it was doing. It was thrown together so last minute that I really expected nothing to really come of it, but I came out surprised. We ended the GT 3-2 with a realistically 4-1. I'll talk about the fourth game where things could have pivoted one way or the other, where there was a good possibility that I actually would have won, but we'll go from there. So let's just start with game number one. Game number one was against Blades of Corn. By the time we had checked in, I was actually playing the Ringer. He had Scarbrand and 2 Bloodthirsters and 2 larger packs of Bloodletters. That's the one. Sorry, brain just shut off. It's been a long day. But it was a very hard-fought battle. One of the first things that I did is I made sure that I got my shooting off into Scarbrand. Scarbrand was the first one to make his way into me, and just to make sure that that was all squared. And basically, I got him down to 1 wound remaining, and I was able to trim it at the end. So Scarbrand immediately taken down. That made a big difference. I didn't lose a ton at this point. But the big moment was that there was a big play where Scarbrand, or one of the other Bloodthirsters, was about to come into me, and I had my Magnic Battleforge, I had the terrain next to me, I had the Runic Firewall, and I had my Hearthguard, my Arc Hearthguard, my shooters, and all 10 of them were still kicking. But basically what I did is I redeployed them and moved them in such a way that it was almost impossible for the Bloodthirster to get into my lines. And with that unique movement, he rolled 2 8s with a reroll, and it just came out that he wasn't able to move his base there, which in turn made it so that I was available to shoot him back. And at that point, during that turn, I had denied him and brought him down to 0 points because it was the shifting objectives where the objective moves towards the center. And at this point, the objective was in the center. I controlled it and I kept him from getting there. So I denied him the entirety of those points, and then I denied him the entirety of the next points. But up until that point, he had really put the pressure on, and that game ended with a win for the Fyreslayers, but just narrowly at 30-28. It was an awesome game. My opponent was incredible. Thoroughly enjoyed my time with it, and it was fantastic. All in all, game number one, big thumbs up. Second game I went into was Ogre Maw Tribes, but not Iron Guts or Gluttons or whatever the frick they're called, the big boys. We went into the Beast Claw Raiders variant, which had plenty of big boys on the big tusk horns and stuff like that, so that was super fun. And the guy had only been in the hobby for about 2 or 3 years, I want to say, and he had a display board and everything, and it was dope. He had done such a great job. It was a really fun opponent. We both played both of the objectives and everything like that. It was a lot of fun. I apologize. I have some of the missions up on him, but this one I can't remember. It was Device? Something like that. I can't remember. But either way, it was a nice close game. My shooting actually didn't play a huge part in this one. This one, interestingly enough, turn 2, after doing Seize the Center with my battle tactic, I had actually moved everything up. I had won the priority. I resumed, because he made me go first in the first round, and I actually popped the run and charge rune, and I ran my rune fathers in, I ran everybody in, and I just bogged him down. I didn't want him to charge off on me or anything like that to get the extra damage. So I just made sure that I pinned him in the corner. It actually worked out pretty well. He had a few units that snuck out, but I definitely made some really strong moves that allowed me to actually get up in their face, make sure they didn't get the extra damage with charging. And all in all, great game, and that one ended at 38-31. He still did a really good job getting his battle tactics throughout a lot of that, and it really was a really close game. It was really down to the last turn where I scored a few extra points, and that wrapped up round Round 3, the final day of day. Oh my god. I've had a really long day. Work has sucked. This is just me being very transparent. Very rough on me. My brain isn't working, but we're gonna try and make this happen, so I hope you stick with me. Please and thank you. Also be sure to like, share, and subscribe right down there. Right down there. Thank you. Welcome back. As you can see, I've changed shirts. The reason I changed shirts is I've changed days. I ended up not being able to film the rest of my stuff after the last fiasco yesterday, so I just thought I'd come back and wrap it back up. So, like I was saying, at the end of day 1, my last match was against Isaac and his Cruel Boys. And I made it a point to write down the actual battle plan this time. So for the rest of these, I'll have the battle plan attached. It was shifting objectives. Now, this one, unfortunately, 20 to 41, Fyreslayers lost. Biggest problem was I got stuck in combat with them and I couldn't clear anything, so I wasn't able to accomplish any of my battle tactics. It was a bit trickier. It was hard to get, seize the center. It was harder to take the flank. I mean, it's already harder to take the flanks. I'm a Fyreslayer. I move 4 inches except for my Magma Dross, and I have 2 of them, but they're supposed to run together. It's a different kind of build. And we did have a few awesome moments where, he's pumping, 6 unit of Bolt Boys into my, 1 Magma Droth. He's had a Beast Killer Bow that he sent into my Magma Droth, did plenty of damage. And when he charged in, he actually charged it into the Monster Killers. He failed to knock out the Monstrous Rampage, and he also, on a dirty trick, failed to make me strike last on a 2-up, so it was pretty bad. I was able to wipe those. There was actually a decent amount of damage. It looked like it was going decent for a while, and then he really capitalized, and especially Cruel Boys having that artifact that they can put on any of their heroes where they can just, at the beginning of combat on a 3-up, just beat it out of combat, made a huge difference. It actually robbed me of Slay the Entourage when I really had him trapped. He was able to escape. Huge change. Great game. Those 20 points, like about 10 to 12 of those points were like the last 2 turns. I just felt battle tactics left, right, and center. But again, great game. So at the end of day 1, we were 2-1 going into the next day. All right, the next morning I got up and I was ready. We were gonna do this. The dream was still alive to potentially do 4-1. The first time I'd ever do 4-1. And I went into Soulblight Gravelord. Bacchanal Blood, so vampire units. He did have Neferata, he did have Bordrai, and he did have a large 10 block of Blood Knights. And then he had 20 Death Rattle Skeletons, 2 units of Fellbats, obviously, for the objective taking and stuff like that. Now, this one was interesting. We played it on Jaws of Galette, so, in this case, a bulk of the game I spent as the underdog. And I really didn't remove a ton of objectives because I kind of learned my lesson from the last GT where if I've got these 3 objectives, I probably shouldn't be plucking away and removing any objectives, forcing them closer to me because I don't want to have to try and chew through them. So I was able to kind of ride out a lot of it. He was doing all of his battle tactics. There was one battle tactic I missed. Now this one's interesting. At the end of the day, the game was 34 to 40. Oh, I forgot the 0. There we go. Now, here's where things get interesting. Right around turn 3, back end of 3 and 4, we got to the point where he's like, there's no way you can win at this point. Let's just talk it out. Now, I kind of agreed, and so we started talking it out. However, one of my battle tactics that I did was do not waver. Now, one of my teammates had mentioned, they're like, oh, you didn't get that battle tactic. I'm like, no, my Magma Droth charged in and I overkilled. And they're like, okay, did you charge another unit? And I said, yeah, I did. And they're like, okay, well then that guy would have been able to pile in, and that's considered a fight ability, so that would have counted. So that would have moved me up to 38. Still a loss, right? Well, here's the difference. When we were talking it out, he talked about, oh, well then I'll just do attack on 2 fronts, and he was using his 2 Fellbats to move onto 2 of my objectives to take those away from me. And he's like, well, the only thing you'd be able to do is redeploy. And are you within 6 of the objective? I'm like, yeah, my Magma Droth is just 6 within the objective. Just 6 to get on the objective. He's like, okay, well, let's see what happens. So I spent the command point to redeploy. I roll the d6. It looks like a 6, but it's cocked. He's like, it's cocked. And I was like, you're right, it is. So I re-roll it, and it was a 6, and I moved on to the objective. So, and then he's like, well, then I would have done X, Y, or Z. This is one of those times where I would encourage everyone, play your games out to completion. And even if it doesn't seem like you can win, do what you can, because a lot of my games were very, very close and they came down to a turn or two. This was something that kept me from probably actually going 4-1. Potentially, I mean, it also could have just made my last game harder, but hey, who knows. So realistically, I probably should have won if we would have just fought that. The fact that he kind of pivoted from that, and you know, if I'm being, he was still a good opponent and everything. The only thing that I had gripes with is he called over a TO rather frequently. He called it over for Callous and Toll, which is obviously in my list, and I admit, I was like, yeah, this is my first time playing them. I would like to make sure I'm getting the rules right, because they get a ward, or they give a ward if they're wholly within combat range. And of the Toll's companions, I'm like, yeah, so that gives them a 5-up, and then if they're all on an objective, they get a 4-up, and they get +1 to their save. Because it adds 1 to their ward roll, which is a 5. He's like, yeah, let me just check on that. Waited a while, got a judge, and then they're like, oh yeah, this is how this works, and we're like, cool. And then he called over a judge for my runic firewall, because I did mortal wounds, and then it states on there, until the end of the turn, you do mortal wounds, and until the end of the turn, -3 from your control score. And he's like, okay, well, if I kill that, then that goes away, right? And I'm like, no, it's because it did mortal wounds, and then it reduces your control score. So there's that. He called over a judge again. Sure, whatever. I just let the judge, I'm like, I have him explain it. Judges are like, oh no, it says, it's like a spell, it's like an ability on a 3-up, this happens and this happens until the end of the turn, regardless. And he was like, oh, I've got things like that, I don't think so, Blake, they have anything like that, but whatever. Again, out of my hands, whatever. And then the next one that he did was the only one that really particularly irked me. His Blood Knights were in combat with my Magma Droth, and they were with my 20 block of Bladed Sling Shields. And he piled out of combat with my Magma Droth. And I was like, okay, you can choose a target to pile into, and you don't need to move towards the closest unit anymore, but you can't leave combat with what you're in combat with. He's like, no, I absolutely can. Like, you can just pick something and then you just move away from it. You just move it. And I immediately pull up my app, scroll to the, like, it takes 2 seconds, pile in the last sentence, hand him the phone. He reads, he's like, oh, okay, well then I just do this. That was the only one that irked me, because at this point we've called over a judge probably 3 to 4 times in this game when it really wasn't necessary. And again, getting to turn 3, getting to turn 4, and then having that conversation of just being like, oh, there's no way you can win. But I could have. And if I would have stuck him to, like, you declared the battle tactic and you move your dudes, and then let me see if I redeploy. Like, we can still speed talk this out, but it's dependent on me rolling a 6. Which, granted, that's gambleable enough. Like, what's the likelihood I'm going to actually roll a 6? Roll a 6, that would have denied your battle tactic, which would have brought you down 4 points, because you would have failed your battle tactic. I would have had my other battle tactic, which would have brought me up 4 points, and then I also would have had an extra objective during that turn. So realistically, it should have come out to something like 36 to 38 at the bare minimum. That was the only one that kind of left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Again, still nice enough guy, nice enough opponent, but again, my biggest PSA to you is play out your games to conclusion. Every time, especially if you got the time. If you're near the end and it's kind of been slow playing, then maybe try and speed talk it through. But just make sure that when people are making those kind of decisions that you do have them stick to it, because that's part of the game, right? Like, you have to declare a battle tactic. You have to do these things. And if you don't hold them to that and he just changes it, it's like, oh, well, since you denied me that, I would choose something else. It's like, well, duh. If we all got denied our thing, we'd obviously choose something else, right? So, thumbs up, whatever. Anyway, I took the loss. It was 34-40, but it realistically probably should have been a win, but whatever. We weren't going to let it grind our gears. We went on to lunch, and then we took a break, and we were back to the last game. Last match was the better part of Valor, and it was against the Cruel Boys again. Now, this time, I was still really nervous. After seeing what the Cruel Boys can do with their dirty tricks and with their damage boosting to gut rippers and stuff like that, I was still very, very nervous. However, we just went for it. He gave me the first turn. He had, the big trolls. He had the Sludge Rake Beast, wherever. He had Bleed 20 block of Gut Rippers. He had 2 6 blocks of Bolt Boys. So I was already nervous. I'm like, here comes the shooting. It's gonna hurt. Basically, what ended up happening is he gave me the first turn. I just ran myself up into the center. I chose the honor guard to -1 attacks if you're wholly within, or if you're in combat with my general and he's wholly within 6 of his honor guard. And that's because primarily my Hearth Guard were always with wholly within 6, because that was their way of getting the +1 to hit and the forward ward to the Auric Runefather on foot. So long story short, it worked. We all just kind of sludged up in the center. He threw in his trolls and stuff like that. I did my covering fire as often as I could with my Hearth Guard, because then they were getting -1 but +1. So they were hitting on their base profile, 4s, 3s, -1, V3. There was a lot of damage going out overall, and it was working. And then basically he had one big turn where he was going to do a big swing and hopefully get rid of a lot of my stuff. My Bladed Swing Shields took it on the chin. The -1 in attacks absolutely worked, made a huge difference, and I was able to intervene both of my Runefathers on Magma Drop, and they just started cleaning house. Started wiping things out. We actually called it at the bottom of turn, or at the top of turn 3, because he's like, I have nothing left. He's like, I got 1 unit of Bolt Boys. They're not going to be able to kill what I need to kill. You'll be able to just pop on all the objectives. You'll be able to do other stuff. So we did end up tucking that out, and I made sure that I also always gave him at least 1 objective, because especially on Battle Predator Valor, there's 6 objectives, and he has a 2-up dirty trick to just bugger off and go back down. So I think it was a pretty safe assumption that he was going to be able to pull off his dirty trick. So that one ended with a big fat 46-24 for the Fyreslayers. So that concludes the event. What did I think? Dragonfall was awesome. It was a really cool tournament. It's all for charity, which is super, super awesome. So if you're anywhere around the Midwest area near Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, I'd highly recommend it when it comes back around next year. Again, great games. I've learned a lot. This list had no business being as decent as it was for the low model count that it was. It was 20 block of Volkite with Sling Shields. It was a 10 block of Hearthguard, a Runefather on foot, a Rune Master, a Grim Old Exile just in case I ran into Sons of Bahamut, and then 2 Runefathers on Magma Drop. I remember making the list and thinking to myself, like, there's no way this works, right? Like, it's a decent amount of shooting, and believe you me, I whiffed a lot of my 3/3 -1 D3 shooting for my Hearthguard, and then there was 1 or 2 times, especially in that last game against Cruel Boys, where it popped off. I shot it into the Sludge Raker Beast, and it did 22 damage, and he had a 5-up board, and he missed more than enough of it to kill it. It was huge. It actually worked in that moment. There was a few times where I got like 6 or 7 wounds through, and I did 6 wounds. Like, I rolled 2s and 1s everywhere. It was nuts. But it was really cool and really interesting to see that kind of thought process manifest out into the table. Now, granted, here's what I am going to say. I did not fight Lumineth. I did not fight Zeech. I did not fight Nighthaunt. So I really didn't fight the main top meta competitors, but that being said, I did play my practice game against Lumineth, against one of the other players from my community who's really good at Lumineth, and he wiped the floor with me, which makes sense. And in that case, it's kind of a rock, paper, scissors situation, which is a little unfortunate, but I get it. There's a lot of factions. It's hard not to have some factions that are immediately just like, oh, you're paper, I'm scissors, snip, and just immediately delete things. But overall review, I had a blast with the army. I was really, really surprised how well I did with the Fyreslayers, and especially with this particular kind of weird shooty list. I can't even really call it that shooty. It's only 10 Hearthguard, and it's like 2 Runefathers on Magma Drop, but the special abilities that they have to do like once per battle, or whatever, once per game in their individual, obviously you can only pick 1 to do one of those things, but it kind of gives you a little bit of flexibility. But even just using the drop helm to give them +1 to hit on their companion weapons meant that you're shooting on 2s, 3s, -1, and that's 4 shots for their breath, which hopefully, GW, please let the Magma Drop shoot in combat. It does not make sense for it to not be able to shoot in combat. Look, I can do it right now. See how I just look down? That's what a Magma Drop to do, and then it just go blah. You just do that. So like, just little addendum right there. But I made that was 2s, 3s, -1 D3, and anti-infantry. So, if I was shooting into infantry appropriately, it was -2, which is great. It was those, and then you also went on your 4 companion weapon, went down to 3s, which actually put some decent damage out. So pleasantly surprised there. So the Droth Helm companion, I could see a Magma Droth list actually running really, really well. It's whether or not you're running a bunch of Runefathers. I still think the Rune Sun's not quite worth it. I mean, I feel like we all knew the attack characteristic stacked. That's implying that your Rune Sun's actually going to be able to kill a monster, and right now, Magma Drops aren't as hard hitting as they should be, I don't think. I think on a lot of monster side of things, they don't quite stack up the same, but sure, I do see a world where a Rune Smiter on Magma Drops could actually be really good, so I could see a Magma Drop list working out really well. I will say one thing that they should do to fix that ability to be able to run a Magma Drop list would be that if it's a Rune Father leading a regiment, that a Rune Sun or a Rune Smiter on Magma Drop is a subsection, or a Grimnir's Chosen or something like that. I think that would help the list building significantly versus just flat out being 5 drops, because even if you put them in on the 5 drops, you haven't spent all your points. You come up short, which is really, really kind of frustrating, because if you're doing, even if let's pretend you're doing all Rune Fathers, 350, 350, so that's 700, and then another 2 is going to be 1400 points, and then about 1850. That's you're shy. You're shy a little bit, so it would be really nice if they managed to make it so that you can at least do, if you do like a Rune Father or a Rune Sun, then a subsection can be, you know, Rune Sun, Rune Spider, and then that way you just at least bring it down to like 3 drops. It doesn't feel nearly as bad. You're still not probably going to be the primary decider, but it makes significantly more sense to me. So that wraps up my GT recap of the last weekend. Of course, if you, like I mentioned earlier before, if you like my content, feel free to like, share, subscribe. It's all down there. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. I've got all that information in the description as well. I've had a blast. It was really fun to bring back out the Fyreslayers. I really enjoyed that. Now, there was another Fyreslayers player who brought, I want to say, like 80 to 90 Fyreslayer models. I have a feeling that that's how GW is intending for them to play right now. I don't have the bandwidth to paint all that. I literally finished up one of my units for this weekend, and that was enough. Just picking out the runes, all the little extra details and stuff like that. Shrug. But I'm also, as you can see, I also have, you know, problem, solution, whatever you want to call it. I have a fascination with the Warhammer universe on the future side and the fantasy side. So until next time, I've been Tattoo Tabletop. Go paint something.